I'm super excited to be going live today. We're going to be talking about a different topic, something that I usually don't talk about today. We're going to be talking about parental styles through the generations and how they've changed, and this concept of whether or not children, adult children, should automatically give their parents respect. That's what we're going to dive in today. We're going to go all the way back to the 1900s and go forward till today and talk about this sense of earned versus conditional respect. But before I get too far into this, I want to do two things here. First is I need to go live on TikTok, but I wanted to start here first because I need to tell you I can't refer to other platforms. So I'm going to be watching your questions, your comments, but I'm not going to say where the comments are coming from. So I'll have to play a little dumb, and but just pay attention to the fact um, that I will be trying to say your name. That's how you'll know whether or not I'm taking questions from the Instagram platform or TikTok. I'm sorry, TikTok platform or YouTube platform. But so TikTok is instigating to be respectful. So I haven't gone live on TikTok yet. So you'll hear me do the intro again, just because I want to bring everybody up to speed there as well. So I'm now going live on TikTok. What an interesting platform, right? All right. So thank you so much for joining me today, because we're going to be talking about this concept. This is something that's coming up a lot. This idea: do adult children have to give respect to their parents? Do we owe it to our parents? I find this really interesting. And I know that the Gen X's feel that their parents were neglectful, that they were raised mostly by the boomers, and that they feel that the boomers sort of were abusive, neglectful, kind of, I know that was popular to talk about them in terms of latchkey kids. You may have heard that, or maybe not heard that there was this age of children, kind of like older elementary age all the way through to middle school, who had been left on their own, and to kind of raise themselves after school. They had that period of time when there really wasn't good childcare services to provide for that period of time. So parents sort of let kids kind of fend for themselves after school. And there were other ways in which the Gen X's were sort of expected to fend for themselves. So is that neglect? And then I know lately there's been this tension about parents feeling angry about adult children calling them out for abuse, saying that parents deserved, because they raised the kid, they gave them a house, they provided for them, they sent them to school, that somehow now they are owed respect for that. So I want to go back. I want to go all the way back. Let's go back to the 1900s and move forward. And I want to first take time to describe each generation, because I have a unique benefit from my age. My primary child care provider was my grandmother, who was born in 1912. Um, and then I was raised by parents who were born in the silent generation. And I'm on the edge between baby boomers and Gen X. I'm not a Gen X, and I don't really feel like I belong to the baby boomers, but my age range is at the end of the baby boomers. So I'm kind of like I'm a cusp person. Then I gave birth to millennials, and I have one who's Gen Z. So I've raised three sons who are millennial and Gen Z. So I've got to watch this from pretty much all the way back to the early turn of the century of 1900s, all the way into the 21st century. So let's talk about this generational differences. Because I didn't know it. I was learning this today about how then from about 1900 to about the start of World War II, that generation was called the greatest generation. Isn't that interesting? They're called the greatest generation. There is the ones that served in World War One. They had a meant it was there was also during the big boom, where the 1920s, where you see the flappers and all of that, sort of the period of time that was sort of discussed in The Great Gatsby. They were also the ones that went through the Great Depression, and they were likely to have been called up and went to war in World War II. Some of them did. Then the generation that followed them, that they was called the silent generation. That's the generation my parents were born into. That started kind of late into the Depression and went right up into about in the mid 1940s. They were called the silent generation. Some of them served in various wars, maybe the Korean War. Some of them might have gotten even drafted, believe it or not. My father was up for the draft in Vietnam early. I know a draft happened way earlier than we tend to think. It was happening in the early 1960s. They were drafting for the Vietnam War. That generation saw a lot of change, and they were more heads down, quiet, just get it done. And that was the generation that right on their tail was the largest generation called, oh, I got a blank screen on YouTube. So I'm going to pause for a second. I got blank screen. That's interesting. Oh, I know why. Thank you, Brittany. And you guys are probably telling me, hey, there's no screen. Okay, so what happened is there's no virtual camera. So I'm so glad for mods who check on multiple. Now, Brittany, will you come in and tell me whether or not you see me now? Oh, I see myself. I'm here. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys, on YouTube. You guys have been watching a blank screen. Oh, I'll tell you, try the life of a creator is so hard. I'll tell you, it just like is. Oh, for those of you who've been patient with me over there, I appreciate that so much. And here I was just saying, I'm not supposed to talk about other platforms while I'm live on TikTok. Anyway, all right. So let's go back. We've got the greatest generation from 1900s to about into the start of World War II, then the around the I'm sorry into the Great Depression. Then we have from the Great Depression into World War II. We have what's called the Silent Generation. That's the generation that raised me. Then right on the end of World War II, we start the baby boomer, which is the biggest generation ever. They were the ones that they're probably the most influential. They have the most money. They've made the greatest noise. Although I have the feeling millennials have made a lot of noise too. They gave birth, by the way, to millennials. And then between them and millennials is Gen X. Gen X is actually the smallest. They tend to be some people have characterized them as the lost child. They've been kind of overlooked. They don't make a lot of noise. And they're the ones that tend to, oh, my sign's backwards. Well, that's really interesting. You know what? I don't know if I can take it down. So sorry about that. It's right side to me, but it's backwards to you. Oh, well, anyway, see, there's problems everywhere. And you know what? I don't know if I can change it into the settings. I don't think I can. So yeah, now I have another technical problem. Yeah, I can't change it. Sorry, TikTok, you're gonna have to just tolerate a backwards sign that looks right to me. I'm sorry that it's backwards to you. All right. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, Lucy, we're just gonna have to tough it out. All right. So, and then you got the baby boomers and then behind them is Gen X's, and then behind them were millennials, and then we have Gen Z's. So, what is different about all these generations? And we want to come back to whether or not respect is earned just because you happen to have done the work of raising children. That really is the big issue. Is all parents deserve respect for for the sheer sake that they gave birth, raised the kid somehow made it to adulthood alive. Now, are they earned respect? I think one of the problems we have, and I'm going to pause here and introduce myself. One of the problems we have is that we're talking to people who have very different mentalities, grew up with very different cultural rules, global experiences, life experiences, saw different trauma, were raised by different types of parents, and we have where who are we are now today. That it's very different today. That we tend to have more dialogue around these things, and we expect kind of different things. So I want to also talk about that. And I'm going to introduce myself. And yes, I am taking questions, but it's to be continued. I'm going to take them near the end of today's live. So if you stick around into about 1:30 today, Central Standard Time, about 20 minutes, I'd be happy to start taking questions. But for right now, I'm going to just kind of talk about this issue, kind of expand it a little bit, and then we'll get into talking about how you see. I'd like to, if we can, to stick to parents, toxic families, and children and adult children. But it doesn't mean if we don't have a lot of interest in that we won't talk about other things. I'd be happy to talk about other things too. So let me go through. I'm Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy. I'm a licensed mental health clinician. I have over 20 years of counseling experience. I also am a narcissistic abuse survivor. As I said, I was raised by the silent generation. They often my parents kind of tend to see themselves as early boomers, but they're actually not. They're like solidly in the silent generation. I'm the end of the baby boomer. I'm just almost Gen X, but yeah, I've seen a lot of neglect and abuse myself, and I love to talk about all these things related to these things. Again, I'm Dr. Carrie Kerr McAvoy. So thank you so much for joining me today, and we will be taking your questions in about 20 minutes. We'll get into that. Oh, thank you. Someone said I'm a I'm an author. Yes, I'm a writer. I am a writer as well. I've put out devotionals. I also have a memoir about my abuse story. I've also blogged a lot. So if you search for me, you can find that I've been blogging tons. I have a lot of articles on a whole lot of topics. So let's kind of define what each generation was like and what that would mean parental style like. And why are we having problems across generations talking to each other? Why are our expectations of each other different? So if you go back to the first generation, which is the greatest Americans, isn't that, I'm sorry, the greatest. They're called the greatest generation. I think that's bizarre. Like, what made them great? They said they were very kind of proactive. I mean, you think of the Great Gatsby and the Flappers, they were sort of pushing the edge. They had this big boom. If you're thinking the United States history of the Roaring Twenties, when everything was kind of making money, there was a lot of industrialization that was happening across the whole world, where trains were being laid down, the world was starting to connect. We had the Wright brothers starting to learn how about aviation. So it was a generation of a lot of like progressiveness. We're moving out of the agricultural generation. Now, remember, marriages used to be about just trying to survive. It was two people with dividing the labor. They were running a homestead. I can't even call it a farm. They're running a homestead, which took all their time. If you guys ever watch those reality shows where they drop somebody into the wilderness and have them try to live for a year with all the elements and with no power, I mean, your whole existence would be about survival. So here you've got a generation where all these advances are being made. You've gotten lights are coming in, aviation. There was the first car was introduced. All of this is happening. So it's super excited time. And they were kind of like, but yet there was these great wars. So they also had a philosophy about just working hard and getting it done, and anything could be accomplished. So it was really kind of this mentality. Now, the parenting style back then, I know this because, like I said, my grandparents were out of that generation and into the silent generation, was more about, they kind of saw children as little adults. If you look back at the photographs and the artwork, you'll see these kids dressed up like full adults standing still. Of course, the photography was such that you had to hold yourself still while you did this. Um, so they really didn't appreciate, and the philosophy then was a big common thing that we said to kids was you're to be seen and not heard, seen to not heard. So they really wasn't sensitive to the child's needs, but it makes sense if you come back out of the agricultural phase when there wasn't time to sort of like make sure kids feelings were tuned into. You were just purely like trying to have the kids survive, and there was a lot of loss. I don't know if you realize that, but mothers and infants mortality rates were really high back then. In fact, there are times where they didn't name a child until they were a year old because they wanted to make sure they made it. So you could even see how this emotional disconnection was happening because of the mortality, because of how hard life was. So here you are at the edge of this industrialization, and now you move into these wars, these big, huge, massive World War I, and then World War II, and that's the silent generation, and the greatest generation would have served those. And there was a lot of loyalty, a lot of patriotism, a lot of colonialism, and a lot of war, just belief in fact, my grandmother talked about rationing. So you were handed little tickets. In fact, I have her tickets from the World War II, where she was allowed to have so much sugar and so much flour. And they used to, like, the women donated their nylon hoses for parachutes. So there's this big kind of coming together as a nation to sort of battle the enemy. So again, when you think about parental styles during that phase, you wouldn't have been very sensitive. It would have been more of what we can do for the greater good of others. And that's what my grandparents and parents were really like. They're kind of stoic. They were very stoic, actually, not kind of. They were very stoic. So the philosophy was stop fussing unless you're dying, because we just have bigger things to be concerned about. Which, can you imagine, that doesn't make you very, very sensitive parents, doesn't make you very helpful as a parent, but you can see how it fit the times. I mean, if we're worried about a tyrant taking over the whole world, and we're worried about how much food we have to feed the armies and whether or not you even have nylon for parachutes, you're certainly not going to be fussing a whole lot about whether or not your kids' dental care was taken care of. Or, in fact, my mother, here's another interesting fact. My mom lived about a mile and a half from school, down a little country road and up another country road. As a 6-year old in Michigan, she walked through snowdrifts to go to school regularly. Now, her mom would keep her home on the really bad days, and she'd talk about her mom would stand on the road and watch her as long as she could until she got too far out of sight and couldn't see her anymore. 6 years old, we're talking about that. So it was a very different mentality. A lot of kids were raised on a farm. In fact, they tend to pull kids out of school once they hit about eighth grade because the farming needs were so high that they needed especially the sons, they needed the sons home to help out. So yeah, I know. Those of you on TikTok, I'm so sorry. My little lettering here is right to me. I can see it perfectly. I can read just what I wrote, but it's backwards to you. And why that is, I have no idea. I don't know why it's backwards. So I apologize for that. I've tried to like correct it. I can't correct it. I'm stuck with it. So I hope you all are good at mirror reading because you're gonna be required to read like a mirror. But we're talking about parental styles through the generations and whether or not parents would deserve respect. That's what we're talking about. And for those of you who are new to my platform, I'm Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy. I'm a psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience. And I'm super excited to be here. So what it says is parenting styles through the generations. Do all parents deserve respect? Please follow me for psychological information and get your tickets for Thursday's webinar on parenting, which is best coping and management strategies with toxic and narcissistic families. That's Thursday. Thursday at this time, I'm going to be in a webinar and I hope to see you all. Please get your tickets to that. So here we are. Now we've got the boomers, when the boomers have been raised by the silent generation. And the boomers are right after World War II, and there's sort of this big period of time where we're all excited and things are like it's booming. I mean, economically we're booming. There is greater houses were being built. If you ever see those houses in your city that look like cookie cutters, they're all the same. They're about 2-level houses, straight up kind of box thing. Those were built in World War II. Right after World War II, there's this big economic boom where towns and cities started popping up. We started moving out of the rural area more into cities and towns, and there was this kind of this big economic period of time that was amazing. And like I said, that generation, the Boomer generation, is the largest generation in a long time, probably the largest going forward. And it was also the most prosperity. I can't say the word prosperous. It was also the most prosperous. So it was a fascinating period of time, and that generation. Now, if you kind of watch what was happening in that generation, that was when Korean War was kind of started, quietly happened, and then Vietnam popped up. Vietnam started to happen, and then we were drafting. And yet the philosophies had changed. We weren't loyal and patriotic like we were during the 2 world wars. Now there was a sense of more individualism, more of the right to have control over our lives, and you'll see a lot of protests. I remember that. That's when I was born. I was born in 62, and it was nightly. The news was filled with protests. The Love generation. There was also all this rage about what was happening over in Vietnam. This big debate: should we be there or not be there? Was it a war? Was it not a war? Should we gotten involved? Are we the world's police officer? Those are the big questions that I remember as a kid watching happening on the news when I was little. So here we have this generation who's kind of born in all of this. They're raised to be independent as well. And they're pushing back. They're pushing back on the cultural changes. Remember what was happening is during that period, women were gaining rights. Women were getting the right to have checkbooks. Women, birth control came out. It was also women for the first time were able to get a divorce. Before they really weren't. There was all this kind of like economic differences and all the racial tensions that was happening. We have Martin Luther King in that period of time. We also saw Kennedy get shot. Both Kennedys get shot, and Martin Luther King gets shot. So there was this big, huge period of cultural change of all kinds that was happening in that period of time. So these the boomers had been raised by parents who were very patriotic and loyal, who weren't very involved parents, and boomers saw that independence. And so what would boomers do? They raised their children the same way. They raised their children by kind of believing that they could fend for themselves. And they're kind of, I would say, maybe this is not fair, maybe, but remember, I'm a boomer, so maybe I can say it about myself. I would say we were a little selfish. We were very focused on our experience. It was a lot of existentialism was kind of happening philosophically. So we were a little more on ourselves. And I have a feeling we probably weren't the best parents. Certainly not the most sensitive, but we hadn't been raised by sensitive parents either because of all this crisis and trauma happening globally. So then you get the Gen Ys, Gen X's. And Gen X's say, hey, I was raised latchkey. My parents weren't around. They were working. Oh, by the way, this is the other big thing that was happening in the boomer generation, the boomer and Gen X's, is that women were leaving homes in greater levels than they ever had before for jobs for the first time. So when I was growing up in the 60s and early 70s, what was typical for me was my options were encouraged were nurse, secretary, or teacher. Or yeah, nurse, secretary, or teacher. They taught us, there was shorthand was being taught in school. So yeah, I mean, so here now you think about what you all have learned that you can do as women. You're taught that you can do anything. So women were leaving the home for the first time and doing more than they've ever done, and had that kind of freedom to be able to do that. So it was a big kind of, again, era of change, but instead of like the way back in the silent generation and the greatest generation of industrialism, this time it was a great change of culture and existentialism and thought and the rise of self. In fact, they used to say the 70s was the me generation. If you go back and look at Times magazine, it used to kind of have like big like thoughts. What are we preoccupied about? And I remember when it said that we are in the me generation. That would have been in about the 1970s. So here you guys got Gen X is born in the middle of that, of the me generation. And we kind of left you guys to raise yourselves in a lot of ways. Play outdoors. You're the first generation that experienced the computer. So that's the rise of the digital age was starting to happen. And the millennials have never not known the computer. And millennials started with the computer in their hands when they were born, and they're known as the digital nomads, is the millennials. And around the time that the millennials were being born, this is where the gentle parenting started to get a foot in. And that was where we believed that if we could perfectly attach and be available, that we could have a perfectly available child in the middle of all that. And I remember we were urged to carry our kids constantly that we could somehow meet their needs. So there's a real shift that was happening in the idea of parents. So you all, if you were born from mid 80s to now, you've been born in the era of Dr. Sears's advice, which is kind of where you're now at. The gentle parenting is a rise out of Dr. Sears. And you were born in the sort of a more humanistic perspective of child rearing that was really different than the child rearing of before, which is to see children as sort of miniature adults who can kind of fend for themselves, and that as long as you provided a safe home, safe environment, that things would be all right. Okay, so that brings us back to the question of this idea of respect, the concept of respect. Does parents deserve respect for the idea of the fact that they raised a kid, provided a home, and that in itself is an accomplishment and it's worthy of emotional recognition? Yeah, Bri says it's authoritative parenting versus authoritarian. It's interesting. That's a great way of putting it. I like that. Yeah. So yeah, it's because you can see as we look through the scope of time and this backdrop of what was happening, it was radically different. I mean, if you compared what my grandparents were going through, the questions we were asking now, they would have just scratched their head and stared at you. They really wouldn't have related to why are you concerned? What does that mean? It wouldn't have meant anything to them. They would have been really puzzled. But today we're very preoccupied. And look what happened, how our expectation of marriage has changed. Way back in the day, the expectation was we just needed two people to run the homestead, and there was a great division of labor. In fact, the idea of romantic love, of being friends and having this close relationship just wasn't the thought. In fact, I remember my parents and grandparents saying that one reason you had kids is so they helped you in old age, so that somebody could be there to turn the farm over to. So it was a really radical different expectations of even like love and relationships and what we get out of kids and all of that. It's just really, really different. Yeah, I know. Yes, my mods are gonna keep telling you, "Yes, I know my headlines are backwards on TikTok, and I'm really sorry about that. I can't change it. I've tried. I can't go into that." Yeah, I know. There's nothing I can do about it. Again, I'm Dr. Carrie Kermakovoy. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm live. I appreciate that you being here. We're talking about does parental does parental just because you're a parent, do you deserve respect? So, how does it make you feel? I'm going to ask you guys all a question. How does it make you feel when, if you're a parent who's my age, boomer, boomer, I know there's not a lot of boomers on these platforms, but I know Mariel's a boomer. Does it bother you when your children talk about the idea of respecting that they want a different kind of respect than just the fact that you raised them? I know for me it doesn't. I mean, but I was a psychologist, so I rate, I wanted a different kind of parenting experience for my children anyway than I experienced, which I was really okay. So to give you a sense of what my parenthood, my experience as a child was, I was really left to my own devices. I was today it would be considered pretty serious neglect. I know my parents didn't see it that way. They felt that they did a great job. And according to probably their parents, they did do a much better job. But I was pretty much left to fend for myself. My parents worked evening shifts, so they both came home about midnight, probably went to bed at 2 o'clock. I was up by 6. I know that because I remember the TV shows I were watching, and they were very early. I was kind of left to fend for myself to find breakfast. So yeah, there's photographs of me climbing into the refrigerator to get stuff. Which, by the way, I have to remind you, refrigerators back then were not safe for children. If you got closed in one, it's not true today. But back in the day, that's how children died. They get into it, it would close, and then they'd be asphyxiated. So yeah, that wasn't a very safe practice. To My parents got up and saw me climbing it. I was on top of the standing in the salad salad tray trying to get in. Yeah. So, and my little sister is behind me holding me up. So I have this photograph of it. It's cute until you kind of think about the context that it was taken in. That's not a cute moment. It's a dangerous moment, but it was cute. So yeah, I was kind of fended for myself, fended for my parents certainly didn't ask me, "How are you doing? How does something make you feel?" I wasn't, like it's not stoicism was a big thing. I was rewarded for bucking it up and keeping my feelings to myself. That was pretty typical, and so that was what I was raised in. But I didn't want that to be what my children had. I really wanted it to be different. So I've had children in the 90s, all the way through the 90s. And that was when Dr. Sears's work was starting to kind of grab foot. And back then we called it love and logic. It's sort of, I would say love and logic, I bet you, is a precursor to gentle parenting, sort of natural consequences. And that's what I kind of raised my kids in. And I know that I was different than a lot of other parents in my bracket, in the sense that I taught my children how to emotionally be sensitive to what's going on, to their feelings. Like, so say they were angry and lashing out, I'd say, use your words, use your words. That's how I raised my kids. But my kids tell me today, I mean, I just had this conversation with my middle son, who's going to be 30 soon. And he said I was very unusual of all the parents he knew, that I really created an enormously safe space. So that's interesting. I didn't know that, but because you don't know what everybody else is doing in their home. But he said our home was really different than other homes were. So, what makes you angry about this whole topic? Because I know I'm speaking to most of you are millennials. So, maybe some Gen X's. What about all of the when your kids come to you, or you go to your parents and say, "You know what? You weren't very available, and I don't appreciate it, and it hurt me." What's their response, and how does that feel to you? Yeah, dysfunctional BM says, "I'm pre-Dr. Sears, so it was not, emotions were not tolerated, and there weren't space for emotions." Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, Muriel's reminding me that we grew up back in the day where there were seat belts. This is funny. You're right, Muriel. Seat belts were often closed, and then put back at behind the seat, and we didn't use them. They weren't seen as necessary. It wasn't a law that you had to wear a seatbelt. In fact, there was periods of time where I would be in the front seat, and these were like big kind of like straight across seats, and my parents would have to hold me in to keep me from being thrown forward because there was no seatbelts. I was allowed to sort of stand and walk around in the car. I mean, yeah, very different. It's a very different world that we've grown up in. Um, oh, so well, this is interesting. Someone just said, Lucy said, I think the question itself is ridiculous. Aren't you supposed to honor your mother and father? Interesting. See, that's what I'm talking about. I have a feeling, Lucy, you're going to get a lot of pushback on that. That's not necessarily the truth. That people don't think that. And let me ask you this: what does honor mean? I have a feeling we all have different definitions of what honor means. So, Lucy, why don't you define for me what honoring your mother and father means to you? I'd love to hear what you think. Because I have a feeling that it's way different from us. I'll tell you how I yeah, and Dahl says some parents feel that you're being ungrateful if you even bring these issues up. Exactly. Exactly. I agree with you. That's how my parents, my grandparents would have felt that way. They would have felt like I was being disrespectful and certainly not grateful. And they would have said, "You had a home. You're here." My father would say, "You're here, right? You're here." Doesn't that for itself speaks to something? Exactly. So I'm still waiting to see Lucy's answer. I can't wait to see what Lucy says here. Um, so Omar said, I talked to my dad about abandonment. And he sat and listened, and I was able to vent, and then he accepted his role. That's awesome. Way to go on that. I mean, that says a lot about your dad, Omar. I really think that's really cool. Yeah, and Astrid's coming in there. Well, yeah, there's this Astrid's pushback. Then parents, if they want to be honored, they should act in an honoring and respectful way. I see there's the tension. So some parents think that it's an obligation. The fact that you're alive and you're functional and that you had an education and you made it this far was evidence that they did enough and that deserves in itself honor and respect. But then there's the new generations that says, no, 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 no. You need to earn respect. Respect isn't just given. That everybody should the idea of respecting another person's just inherent right to safety and physical provisions and tangible goods doesn't mean that I need to give you emotional respect. See, that's how the differences are played out today. Very much so. Yeah, so Nocturne says, yeah, children should respect. See, you feel the divide? You can feel the divide between both sides. You can have so it's really, and this is what I guess is what I one of the things I think is one of my big powerful points is that we're not talking about the same things. We're not talking to the people who experience the same environments and the same life experiences. We're talking about very people who come out of very different experiences than your own. And I know you're like, well, they're my mom and dad. I should know what they've no, you do not know what they went through. You did not know what it was like to survive, go through that period of time with Vietnam War, where your father may have been drafted and came home different. And he's now struggling with severe PTSD. You won't have known what it was like to have rationed your goods during World War II, where you were not allowed certain things and the men were gone and the women had to function and work. And then when the men came home, women lost those jobs and returned back to home. You don't know what that's like. You also don't know what it's like to have not have the choices to birth control that we have today and to have been settled with large families, whether you wanted it or not. Or the fact that you couldn't have, this is an interesting conversation because there was abuse in my family, severe abuse in my family. I had a big conversation with my mom about that. And my mom said, listen, I had nowhere to go. I had no access to the checking account. I didn't have a right necessarily to get a divorce, and my parents wouldn't have accepted me back. So what was I supposed to do? Men were head of the home, head of the household, their word went. Same with my father, as well as my husband, meaning my dad. What was I supposed to do? I had no choice, Carrie. I had no choice. I had nowhere to go. That's what now for me, standing in my position, I'd say, yeah, but you had little children who were being physically hurt. And shouldn't I have mattered more? Shouldn't you have protected me more? Couldn't you found something to do? And see, I've never faced a world like that. I don't know what it feels like to be in that position where my parents wouldn't have taken me back. I couldn't have opened a checking account on my own. She was a nurse, but maybe the hospital wouldn't have released the money to the bank account with only her name on. I don't know that world. I never lived in that world. So it's hard for us, those who've not experienced this, to have a real good sense of the limitations people had in those phases. And so, yes, I feel angry about it. I feel a lot of anger about it, but it doesn't necessarily. But I didn't face her experiences. Now Lucy says I'm changing the subject. How am I changing the subject, Lucy? I don't know how I did. All right, I'm going to ask across everybody everywhere. Did I change the subject? I think I'm still talking about honoring and respecting. It's hard for me to honor and respect my mother's decisions, but I'm saying I didn't experience my mother's circumstances. That's what I'm saying. Does that then mean that she's owed it? I'm not saying that. But I also am not saying she's not owed it. I'm actually not weighing in at all on it. I'm just saying this is a really tough topic, a very tough topic. So Tammy's asking, is this worthwhile to even bringing up to an 83-year-old father? I think it might be interesting to talk about it from his perspective and then ask about it from how he viewed it and what he thought of your raising and where it's gone with you. And I think it's just interesting if you bring it up instead of having an agenda, being curious about it. I think that would be very, very interesting. Dysfunctional, Alban, you said saying here, oh, you're just agreeing that that's what your life was like. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, Carly says you can try to understand it, but you're right. There's two sides, and there's all these different experiences. Yeah, and somebody else says no. Dal saying no, you didn't change the subject. You're just bringing up some very good points. Yeah, okay, Dal, I agree. It's hard, and Dal, I can see your ethnicity, and I know you and I grew up in different worlds, and we had very different experiences. And I know that I won't be able to quite relate to your world experiences, nor can you quite relate to mine. And the question we have for everyone, including these different generations of parents and children, is can we hold space for these differences? Can we avoid making there a right way and a wrong way, but sincerely create a tolerance for your way, that it was your way and this was what it was like for you? I would hope, let's go back to my mom's example with seeing her children being abused. Now, remember, she was raised by the silent generation where you didn't question things. So she was culturally programmed not to question. I grew up through the boomers who were like rebelling against everything. We were taught it was okay to question. Remember, like I said, this was during the ERA was being pushed. There was that we were really pushing back on the government about Vietnam, and there was a lot of like upheaval going on culturally. So for me, it was more okay to do that. But I would hope that but I don't know. See, those of you who read my book, Love You More, know I stayed way too long, according to most of you. And why? Well, I was raised in a very strictly evangelical Christian home where marriage came first and the view of divorce was that God hated it and then I would be displeasing him. And then I was also hurting the possible salvation of my husband if I left. Now, I know that's something a lot of you will not appreciate because you never grew up with that. You wouldn't have known of all the programming I had about don't leave a marriage. So you think I stayed too long and I had bad boundaries. And for me, I see it as that I was maintaining ethics and respecting my religious convictions. Was I wrong? To a lot of you, I am. To a lot of you, I appeared very weak. But to those who came from my philosophy, I looked very strong. Very, very strong. So there's all these nuances. This is what I find fascinating about perspective. It's like a Rubik's Cube. And we all have the same cube. It's reality. But there's all these different sides and facets to it. And the things that shape it is our experiences, our cultural perspective, the programming we got, the values of the time. All of that shapes the way that we see the same Rubik's Cube. And here's the thing that I've noticed about all of us, especially on the fact that I'm on this forum, so I get a lot of input from all of you. We don't like it when people have a different perspective than our own. We feel like they should agree with us that there is one right perspective. There is not one right. There is your perspective and my perspective. Now, Is there toxicity? Is there abuse? Absolutely. It's the infringement of the right of another human being. I agree with that. Have all generations been good at being not abusive? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I would say, I bet you, if we go back and really look at the policies, the government, US government policies during the World War II, it was abusive. Look at what's happening now. Look what's happening to the infringement of police on the rights of the citizens. Are police officers really protecting citizens' rights? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's abuse going on. Absolutely. So it's really hard for us to sit in these positions of which we see these things that we know is wrong, but we also have to then at the same time show up and not be abusive to those who live in these other very different paradigm positions, very paradigm worldviews. Yeah, I know. I've really raised some tension here on various platforms. I can see the tension. It is tough. It is very tough. How do we protect? Yes, my lives are saved. Yes, you can go over to where you're seeing that. Yes, that's where they're at. And remember, I can't mention other platforms on TikTok now on TikTok lives. How do we protect each other's rights to opinion, rights to life experiences, rights to safety, rights to emotional health, and still have each and still create space to allow us to be in different positions. Yeah, it's tough. This is tough. As a psychologist, I've been trained to try to listen. It's hard to listen is really hard. And yet at the same time to keep trying to offer a better way by saying, yes, that may have been the way it was, but let's respect the way it is today. Yeah. Yeah. Robin says my father was very physically and mentally and emotionally abusive. Absolutely. I A lot of our experiences from these previous generations have been very abusive. Am I saying there here's please hear me on this. This is what I'm not saying. I am not saying that it was right. I'm not saying your health, well-being, and safety didn't matter. I am not saying that. I am not saying that. Please know that. You will if you watch any of my content, you know that I'm not saying that. And a healthy parent will be able to go back and say, this is a conversation I did have with my mom saying, I wish you had done different things. It hurt me that you didn't take more action and it made me feel like I didn't count. That's what I did say to her. You may not have had the choices to leave the way I've had choices to leave, but I don't want your judgment for my decisions that you don't understand. And I also, at the same time, wish you could have done something different because it really powerfully affected me. And it continues to powerfully affect me. Now, what would be a healthy response to be that? I'm sorry. You're right. I wish I could have done it differently. I didn't see it. I didn't know to see it. And you're right. It costs you a lot. That's what healthiness looks like. And I'm going to tell all of you who are raising children right now, you're making errors too. I'm guarantee it. You're making because nobody parents perfectly. This generation of gentle parenting has problems too. And you won't know until they're grown. That's when you're gonna that's the unfortunate part about parenting. Is like you do all of the stuff that you're doing and you can't see the outcome. And the only way you'll see the outcome is when they hit adulthood and find out whether or not it worked or not. So we won't know it for another 15, 20 years, whether it worked or not. But when we do, you can't change it. By the time you know, you're done. It's already over and the choices are have been made. But I hope we can have these same kind of conversations with you and your children as what we're having right now about us and our parents. I really hope that. Yeah, it's tough. So, yeah, this has been I appreciate this forum that we've been able to talk about this today because like I said, I've seen a lot of like tension on the platforms about parenting and who's right and who's wrong. And yeah, what I wanted to do today was to bring different perspectives because this would be the fascinating thing. Let's take it that your parents did really blow it. They were neglectful, maybe they were abusive, and you may not be able to have this conversation with them. I'm not saying you can, but if you can, I think this would be fascinating. Come in and say, hey, I've never really appreciated what it was like what you grew up in. Can you talk more about what it was like to be a parent in the 19 whatever? And have them talk about that. And to say, what things now, looking back, do you wish was different about that era? Do you think that was maybe harmful? And then listen to that. And then to say, here's how it was for me. And these are the things that I wish was different today for me as well. And then maybe you can come around and grieve some of those things, be angry about some of those things. Maybe you can have a sense to really have a chance to connect in a way that creates space for both of you. And I think that would be freaking amazing, honestly. Tammy asked, why is Gen X kids so different from the rest? That's a fascinating question. Gen X kids are referred to as the lost they're like the lost child of the family. It was like they were born between these massive tensions. Okay, you got the baby boomers who are sort of cultural uprise, all this happening, ethnicity, racial, gender, economic, all sorts of things happening in the boomers. And then you got the millennials who are the digital nomads for the first time, and everything's happening again. And you got this generation, which is a small generation. They're smaller, and they're kind of caught between these two big tides. And plus, like some of you said, they were raising themselves. So yeah, they're kind of quiet. They're the if you think of the dysfunctional family with rigid roles, they're the ones who just sort of like try to like, I don't want to listen to it. I'm just going to go find a quiet corner and do my thing. Like please just keep me out of it. I don't want to be caught in all of this. So yeah, that tends to be why Gen X is the way that they are. I like them. I mean, I've worked with them. I'm almost a Gen X myself. I would love to know this of all of you who are cusp people. I was born in 62. 63 to 64 seems to be normally the end of the boomers. My kids are on the cusp too. They say the same thing, that we don't really feel like we fit. We just don't fit. So I don't feel like I can say I'm a boomer, but can't say I'm like a Gen X either. I just don't fit. Yeah. Bri, do you think your mom is a boomer or a Gen X? Do you think that's? Yeah. I actually have the greatest contact with millennials. So I work with you guys. You guys are my colleagues. I'm on these platforms. You guys are here. So I have the greatest contact with millennials, and I love you. Frankly, I just think you guys are awesome. I love the way you think. I love how you're out of the box. I just find all of it fascinating. Yeah, you're really a lot of fun. So yeah, those who are on the cusp, do you think like, hey, it's Kate? Do you feel like you're a millennial or a Gen Z? Yeah, you feel disconnected to either. Yeah, I know. I do too. I do too. I don't really feel like I belong either. I feel kind of like I'm a nomad. I'm in kind of mid ground. Yeah. This has been a fascinating topic. So what anything kind of left that I did not talk about? I know that we kind of hit into this really, touchy area about how it felt and is this fair and how good is this? And yeah, so nocturnal, you feel more like Gen X. Yeah, I do too. And Muriel, how about you? Do you feel like are you a boomer or do you feel like you're more Gen X? Because you're the same age as me. I'd be kind of curious. And Brittany, you said you're millennial, but cusp. Do you feel like you're on a cusp probably between Gen X and millennials? I'm going to guess, or maybe right? Are you more on a cusp of Gen X and or millennials and Gen Zs? I'm sorry, I don't really know your age, Brittany. Yeah, I would love to know how you feel. So let me put a plug in while I'm waiting for some of you guys to answer some of the questions I threw out there. And thank you for sharing your story. You're welcome, Lisa. I'm glad I did share that story. You're 81. Okay, 81. 81 would have meant you're 20 years older than me. And that meant you were born in 42. Then that meant you are on the cusp of boomers and the silent generation. So you would have been born, that silent generation was up until about the 1945. And then that's when boomers started. About 44, 45, boomers started all the way into about 65. That's that range. And yeah, so yeah, you would have been on that cusp. You feel like an old soul, but you're 29. I feel like a lot of the millennials, you're kind of on a cusp of the millennials and Gen Zs, Kaylee. I would say a lot of you do feel like old souls to me. Honestly, I agree with you. I feel that way. My 20, I have my youngest is a Gen Z, and oh man, he's wise, very wise beyond his age. So yeah. Yeah, I agree, Brie. I do think that Brittany's a very young millennial. I didn't mean to age you, Brittany. You can come back and digitally slap me for that one. I wasn't thinking of times when people were born. So, How do I weigh in against gentle parenting against positive negative reinforcement academically? I love the question. Let me revisit it on another time because I need to do more reading into gentle parenting. I've heard the concept. I think I kind of understand it because just by the word, but I don't know enough that I can sit and talk about it in terms of positive and negative reinforcement. I have some, to be honest with you, and I don't know why. I feel like, I have reservations about gentle parenting. I do, I have some reservations about it, but I do need to read into it and figure out why it makes me a little uneasy. I think it's the humanistic part of it. It's sort of because remember, my kids were raised during Dr. Sears' era too of if we showed up perfectly, we can meet everybody's need and we'll have well-adjusted kids. It's not true. It's not true. So I think there's a little hubris to it that I'm worried about. But let me read into it, figure it out, and then come back and talk more about my feelings about gentle parenting and what that is and what it isn't and all of that. But I don't know enough. I can't even tell you what the tenets of it are. So I don't want to weigh in until I know something about it. Hey, I have not talked about the webinar on Thursday. If you like this kind of dialogue, you like to have a chance to be here and experience dynamic, didactic experiences. The webinar on Thursday is from 11:30 to 1 o'clock Central Standard Time. And that is, no, Brittany, you don't act your age. You're very mature. And I'm, so yeah. So please, I feel now I'm going to blush. I feel stupid that I guessed you wrong. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. But Thursday, please get your tickets. It's $30 and it's going to be amazing. We have three large topic areas. We're going to talk about the role of the dysfunctional person in the family's impact on the family. Then we're going to also then talk about how you hold your boundaries in a chaotic family situation. And then the third arena is going to be how do you raise healthy children when you're in a dysfunctional family in its entirety? So, what do you do to have healthy emotional children? Now, this webinar, if you've ever gone to one of Lisa's or gone to one of mine, it's going to be run very differently. We're going to introduce the subject areas with an introduction. It's got an all-star panel of platform influencers. So some of them have massively huge platforms like Mental Healness with over 1 million on TikTok and elsewhere. It's very large elsewhere. And we have like Bri's going to be, Brittany's the moderator. It's going to be a really amazing group. And we're going to open it and then let you guys ask your questions. So it's really about the way you want to shape it in these big major topic areas. So like I said, we're going to open the topic areas, which is the impact of a dysfunctional family members on the family. How does that impact the family? How do you stay healthy and hold boundaries in the midst of chaotic family situation? And how do you raise an emotionally healthy children when you know that your family at large is not well? So I would please make sure that you incorporate that. If you think that's going to be helpful, I'd love to see you on Thursday. The tickets are going to be open until Thursday morning. Please, it would be fantastic. We're going to do this over the lunchtime. That would be fantastic. I'd love that. And thank you so much, Tammy. I appreciate it. It's going to be a great webinar. I'm super, super excited. It's going to be Lisa Sonni, Stronger Than Before, Bri, who's been here, Abuse is Abuse. We've got Brittany as the moderator. It will have Rollercoaster of Love. It's also going to have Taylor. I really wish that all of that kind of hacking stuff stopped. I'm really trying to find a way to block people like yourself who's advertising services on my platform. I'm not here to advertise your whoever bug tools are. Please stop. And I'm actively working how to filter all these comments out on that platform. It irritates the hell out of me. Do I act angry? Yes, I'm angry. You guys flood my comments and bug me to death. So, and I won't have it on here. I won't. So please don't do that. Anyway, so I'm sorry for that middle of my advertisement. It's going to be great. I really hope that you guys will come. I'm trying to block them. I keep trying to put in hidden words over there and I can't seem to get it to stop. It's irritating the crud out of me. You guys know what it is. You see it. If you're ever reading my stuff, you're like, there they are. And just irritating. Yeah, I know. I'm starting to block them. I mean, just like blocking those accounts, which I hate doing because maybe the person themselves I want them there, but I don't want them advertising on my platform. They need to quit doing that. Yeah, and now they're advertising in my comments. How weird is that? So yeah, please consider coming to the webinar. It's going to be amazing. Any last questions? I'm going to be on here for 5 more minutes today. I know, I agree. Spammers, screw off, trolls. I hate them. Yeah. I would love that. So yeah, Lucy asked a question. I'm kind of curious about Lucy's question. Let's come back. Lucy, you've been a lot of fun to have on this platform today. I asked from the beginning when I said your sign was backwards, but you never said it was on abuse. Well, my whole platform's on abuse. So probably maybe you don't know that because you're new to me, which I hope you stick around because I love your pushback. But I have a platform on narcissistic abuse. But today I'm talking about parents and children. And I started out by saying the children, some parents, children says that parents, because of neglect, I did say that, don't feel their parents have earned respect. I did frame it that way. Maybe it got missed, but I did frame it that way. So yeah, I'm pretty clear cut about my platform, but that doesn't mean I don't like to go off topic of that. So yeah, well, I'm glad you're here. I could tell you're new to me, new to this forum, and you hung around for the whole hour. I thought that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. That's another question. Is a punishment when parenting ever justified? I, that's what I will save that topic. Nowadays, your question on gentle parenting is fascinating, and I probably have a very controversial perspective of punishment. And I know I'm probably going to piss some people off with my opinion, but let's jump into parenting styles like punishment. What's the best way for correction, parental correction? What works and doesn't work, and I'll try to get into behavioral psychology based upon conditional and classical conditioning training. We'll go back to Skinner and Watson's work and see how all that connects. I used to run a runaway shelter. So you can imagine I was very limited in what I could and couldn't do in a runaway shelter. I had this fascinating experiment where we actually rewarded and ignored. The punishment was ignoring. We ignored this. We had a very troublesome runaway that was in the shelter, really causing problems with all the other kids. And so the kids and I, except for him, got in on it, and we agreed what we would pay attention to, and we agreed what things he did that we would ignore. I'll tell you, it worked. It worked. We also did this with a professor. Here's a fun thing. So, for those who may not know, there's a classical and conditional behavioralism says that when you give attention, you're rewarding behavior, and when you withhold attention, the worst thing that any kind of person doesn't want is no attention. They don't want to be invisible. So, we had this professor. He was very into Skinner, very big into it. So we decided that we would give him a taste of what that was like. So a class, we decided that whenever he stood by the door, we would give him our undevoted attention when he lectured. And that whenever he moved over to the chalkboard, because this is the days before electronic and digital resources in the room, whenever he moved over to the chalkboard, we would look down at our desks and not give him attention. Do you know that guy before too long was standing mostly by the door and lecturing? So it worked. It worked. So yeah, it's fascinating how human nature, we're so fascinating. So any last things before we wrap it up? I would love you guys to come to Thursday. I won't be going live on Thursday because of the webinar. I will be instead in that webinar, but I would love to see you there. So make sure you get your tickets today so you don't miss it, on how to stay healthy in the context of a dysfunctional family. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't reinforcement amazing? It's really wild how we can do that. Yeah. So Tammy says you're a Gen Xer and that your son's millennial and there's a lot of distance. Yeah, that's tough. That's very tough when it's like that. Oh, I'm 29 comments below. Let me go back into. Yeah, silent treatment's very, very, very harmful. Do our professor ever know that we did it on purpose? I didn't tell him. I don't know if someone told him or not that that's what we had done to him. So he was a good guy, but I also knew he was raising his children in the same way. And I think maybe we felt a little pissed about that. I don't know why we did it, but yeah. So yeah, I've seen it work. When you get the consensus working against the person, it can really powerfully play into that. It's interesting. Yeah. So somebody nocturnal said they had a teacher pin something. I can't see the whole comment. Let me see. Move it over. Let's see here. Oh, okay. Pin the rest of the class against me. Ew, man, I'm sorry. That's very painful. Nocturnal, it would be very, very painful. I agree. I wouldn't see with the child we were doing it with the behavior that was bad for the group. He was being very disruptive and harmful to the runaway shelter. And so we were doing this as a way to manage his out of control behavior that was abusive. That's what we were not using it as in the professor's case. That wasn't very kind. But in that child's case, it was actually a survival mechanism, and he was easier to live with. And you know what he got? He got a lot more positive interactions with his peers as a result of that. So it actually for him was a boon too, because he got feedback that was the best kind of feedback. So all right, you guys, this was a lot of fun today. Again, get your tickets for Wednesday or Thursday. I won't be here on Thursday on live, but I'll be back next week. And I'll let you guys know. I'll try to find a way to announce what the topics are ahead because I don't want to always talk about abuse constantly. I kind of get worn from it, but maybe there's an area of abuse that I've really missed that you wish I'd say more about. Please DM me and let me know that. And the link in my bio, the webinar's link is in my bio. Check out ABA training. Oh man, ABA training. I'm autistic. There's a lot about ABA training in the autistic community, a lot of rage about ABA training. But I'd be kind of curious to see what you think. Yeah. And I'll try to do that whole thing. I know one thing I do want to talk about. I've got some topics I lined up that I want to talk about in lives. One is just for you all who is still here. I want to talk about whether or not you can have the diagnosis of an antisocial personality disorder, and is it really narcissism? And can you be antisocial personality disorder and not be abusive? I want to talk about that. I did that with narcissism, and the outcome was no, you can't get the diagnosis of narcissism, NPD or yeah NPD without being abusive. It's automatically abusive. That's no way to be NPD and not be abusive. I don't mind revisiting that. I know there's a lot of like, oh, we're demonizing them. No, I'm sorry, we're not. We're just calling out behavior and labeling it. But so love to talk about that. I also want to talk about this idea of alpha females. What is that? Is there anything true about? I know that's more now gender differences. Is there anything true about that? What's happening between the genders right now? I'd love to talk about that because I think there's a lot of tension going on between men and women are not necessarily good. Hey, Debbie, I'm so glad to see you. And then another topic I have that I would like to get into is, yeah, let's jump into this topic of gentle parenting and other type of parental tools that we've used through the years. Is it really good or not good? Yeah, to be continued. Sure. Go ahead and ask a random question. I've recently been told by several males on several different areas that I am no man will ever want me because I'm too strong. I have too much education. I don't, by the way, I don't make money because these platforms don't pay much. So but anyway, I'm too smart, I'm too educated, I'm too fat, and I'm too old. So I'm outdated and I just need to consign myself to singlehood for the rest of my life. That's what I've been told. It's very fascinating to be told that. Thank you very much for all of you who like to weigh in on that and let me know that. So yeah, let's talk about, is there such a thing as an alpha female, and what in the world is that? Yeah, I'm sure nocturnal there is a lot of young women who are slandering men around ages and they're killing themselves. Yeah, let's talk about it. I think that's fascinating. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of tension between the genders right now. I think, and this is my reason. My reason is the reason there's tension is because we're again another cultural upheaval. We're in a new definition of what does it mean to be a woman and what does it mean to be a man. And I think that there's creating lots of anxiety and insecurity. And we're seeing that. And I also think that our definition of intimacy has really changed, what we expect out of dating or not dating. I think this new generation, Gen X's and millennials, they're more single people than ever. I think they're more fearful of commitment, more fearful of intimacy than ever. But that's just my observation. I don't know that. That's just my observation. So it's to be continued. I'm still waiting for your question. I want to take your random question. So I'm waiting for that. Somebody told me the other day that my guy will leave me in time because I'm too weird. That's just cruel. I don't get that. I don't get that. And then dysfunction says, please cover nonviolent communication. Can you say more? Like what kind of nonviolent communication? I agree. All communication should be nonviolent. I have this belief. I have a belief that if we learn to express ourselves and could hold space to hear each other, that we could work out any conflict. I know that's not what happens, but I would love to do that. You have to fact check what? What are you having to fact check? I would love that. Oh, so G Dog said I'd love to date you. Oh, G Dog, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm proud of what I've done. I want to get into the bell curve. How much do you guys know about the bell curve? I don't want to do it today, but I will get it this alpha female topic. I want to talk about the bell curve. You guys heard of that? It's a statistical anomaly. It's not anomaly. It's a statistical fact about things about what happens in nature. How we all range around what's called a bell curve. All of us, about everything, our height, our intelligence, our weight, our income, everything. You can put any quality, measure it across the whole population, and it will form this bell curve. It's amazing. It's normal, exactly, normal distribution. It's what you have to learn. It's what statistics is all about. Everything about stats is about the bell curve. And remember, as a highly educated person with a PhD, I had to learn a lot about statistics. I know a lot about statistics. Oh, so there's a book called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Interesting. Interesting. So I'd love to talk about this idea of alpha females as being outside of the bell curve, and that makes and it's just kind of the statistically, and it's an odd thing that we're doing with stats. We're doing really weird things with stats. We're actually making some erroneous conclusions when we talk about alpha females. So I want to get into that. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. So, yeah, so Nocturnal says your two other dates were abusive. One person I found attractive, but they were already in a relationship. Hell no. Yeah, I agree with you. You don't want that. And then Meryl says, if you don't accept being objectified, then some men can't handle. I know, and I don't understand that. I mean, I do understand it, but I find it really sad. I find it really, really sad. Why do boomers get so offended when the advice is not obeyed? Well, because you have to, again, that's where I started earlier today. And I hope you go, we're going to cut out the dead spot on YouTube. There was a dead spot where there was no visual signal. We'll figure out what to do about it, but because I hate to miss that section. But anyway, this has been taped. This whole thing's been taped. And we'll revisit that. We'll talk about the earlier generation had to follow directions because they were going through wartime. They're going through big turmoil, and so the pressure was just to show up and follow directions. And so they tended to expect that from your children, which is what you're seeing now. Does that make it right? I'm not saying it makes it right. Alpha female, see, the idea of an alpha female is a new concept that doesn't actually in real life exist. It doesn't actually really exist. It's a form of, it's really actually has to do with a woman's independence, the level of independence. So let's get into that, because I can feel there's all this tension around us. We're throwing out new terms that we don't really have good definitions to. It's not research based. You guys know that, right? There's no research on alpha. It's a non-essential, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Same with kind of, here's another term, codependency. Go research that one. Find out what research is on that topic. It doesn't really exist. So you guys are really talking about styles of women that tend to make men they don't like, they feel insecure. We don't see this idea of knowing our place. Would you like to be told that you should know your place? All men who happen to be here right now, would you like to be told you should know your place? Would you like to be told that you're too much, you're too smart, you make too much money, you have too much education? That's what you're doing to women. It's not nice. You're saying women should fit into a container for your insecurities. Well, let's get into it. We'll get into it. And you can tell I have strong feelings because, hell, I have a PhD and I'm not young. I'm 60. So I've lived a lot of life. So, yeah, okay. To be continued, gave me a question. Why should someone let you court them and not until you ask them out do they mention a new partner? And you wish you'd known before and how they felt. Should I remain friends? Absolutely not. I'll tell you why. Because they weren't honest with you. They didn't tell you all these important pieces because they didn't consider your feelings and that you needed to know these facts. So for me, that would be a massive breach of trust. And I couldn't go forward knowing that this person would decide what I needed to know when I needed it to know, and which wouldn't respect what I believed I needed to know when I needed it to know. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. That's a person who doesn't see you enough as a person to care enough to let you in on important details that are like game changers that they would have themselves, have you done that to them, would have seen as a betrayal. They betrayed you. So I would not remain friends with them. I would see this person has not earned my trust. So thank you for asking me that. It's a great way to end today's topic. And I will be back for this kind of live in a week. And let's get into it, guys. Let's in a week get into alpha females. Let's talk about that. So yeah, Fierce Girl AA did create codependency. Exactly. It's created by Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not, it's actually, if you look, there's not a lot of research. Psychology and sociology is not researched. It's a fuzzy term that nobody agrees on. It's been used to a lot of different things. I want to make sure I didn't have any final comments that have come through. So we will, in a week, we will get into alpha females. I'll do a lot of research on that between now and then so we can get ready to talk about it, and we'll get ready for a lot of heat. We'll get ready for that. So you guys have a great rest of the week. I'll see you on Thursday for the webinar. Thank you so much for hanging out with me across all these platforms. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.